say, is the fourth country to leave this concept of a European Union with undemocratic institutions. The first country was France, when it voted in a national referendum against the Constitution of Europe. The second country was the Netherlands, which did the same. The third country was Greece, which has been held hostage, the tortured animal of Europe, with no say over its economic affairs, where the only reason why Greece can't leave the euro and leave the European Union is because it depends on European ministers for its bailout. It is tortured and humiliated so that its democratic voice can't be heard. Now, if you add on the list to that a fourth country, which is Britain, that also does a vote and also, like the first two, rejects this ideal of a European Union run with undemocratic institutions, then you say, this surely should be the time when they think, let's listen to how we can reform our political machinery to be closer, to be able to change concepts of local authority, to stop subverting the nation states in order to promote independence movements within the regions of European countries to the detriment of their national constitutions. Let's have some reflection on that, now that we've received a democratic vote. And instead, the reply is, you are going to be leading yourself to economic failure, that we are not going to guarantee the residency rights of any of your citizens within the European Union, that you're going to get no say over the security of your affairs. So stay wedded to our undemocratic institutions if you believe in constitutional government, if you believe in the history of Europe as being supportive of a patriotism that loves its culture, that believes we're interlocked, then you must reject this illogical principle of performance of government through undemocratic treaty.
Now you have your reply. Yes. And then we'll open, after the reply, we'll open the round for the audience. You can ask your questions in Spanish or English, and then so think on the questions, and then we'll continue. So.
Well, thank you very much. It's a simple question of logic. Institutional reform does not entail Brexit. Where will Britain be without a voice in the European Union? And I refer now to well-known fact about the party, the UK Independence Party, which had campaigned for seats in the European Parliament, which they then refused to actually participate in, while still claiming the salary of European members of Parliament. And that is the kind of stubborn little Englander approach to debate within Europe. I certainly hope that the EU doesn't punish Britain, but looking at some of the predictions, and like I said, it's very difficult to have facts about the future, but it's very unlikely that Britain will get a better deal outside of the European Union. And although in some ways I am fond of my little island, I don't think it has the ability to make it alone anymore. And the last time I had a debate about Brexit, I was visiting my parents, and my parents live in quite a common thing for Western Europe, which is basically a place full of old people like them that I find very boring, because that's the demographic truth, is that we need immigrants to take care, to pay for the elderly population of Europe. And when I went to the shop, I found somebody arguing for Brexit who wasn't as eloquent or polite as Dominic. And his narratives were one of Britain can be great again, we had an empire, we can rule the world, we can have trade with Canada and Australia because there really are colonial offspring, etc., etc. And this is the kind of nonsense that has been behind the Brexit campaign. I believe the European Union should be reformed. However, I think being a stubborn child and performing Brexit is not the way forward. On economics, I'm not an economist, but we know, and I think it's beyond doubt, that Spain has definitely benefited from the European Union. And I'm also thinking of the regions, because, and I'm not thinking of Spain now, because many of those rural regions that voted for Brexit actually receive huge benefits from the European Union, directly to poorer regions of England. And I think the economic story is, it's quite obvious the European Union has been very beneficial for some places. I'm not going to argue that for Greece, although, as I said, I'm not an economist. And as for joined up lives are the future of the world. In the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development predicts that within 20 to 30 years, there'll be some people who don't even have a job because robots are going to be so advanced. And technology will really change the face of the planet and the lives of the people on the planet. And we have to remember that. As British people, we cannot retreat back to our island. So I don't argue that the European Union is a utopia. I don't argue that reform is not needed. I don't argue about the finer points of law. I argue that there is pre-political goodwill that is necessary between members of European countries. I believe that it is easier to fix something than start anew, and that rather than triggering this unpredictable Brexit, Britain should be engaged, and other countries should be engaged in a much more meaningful and beneficial conversation. I rest my case.
Well, thank you very much to both of you. I think they have fixed the positions very clearly with first, a strongly democratic argument of Dominic and a strongly pro-cooperation, so to speak, argument of Daniel. Now, I don't know whether anybody has any question, but now the room is open. Alejandro.
In what ways will a Scottish independence threaten the Brexit movement and the unity of Britain?
It's a huge threat. It's a huge threat to the unity of Britain, but it is also a huge threat to the unity of the European Union. That, of course, the Spanish government is opposed to an independent Scotland that joins the European Union on the basis that it encourages independence movements that may break away from other parts of their nation states. Obviously not just a problem for Spain, but also a problem for Italy, and other countries have similar concerns. And it's also personally difficult for me. I'm in favor of Britain staying together, and at the same time I believe in democracy, so I accept that it was good to have a referendum on Scottish independence, and personally I'm pleased with the result that they want to stay in. I understand that it can be very tough. A lot of British people have, as Daniel pointed out, found the Brexit debate very tough and also misleading. But also the Scottish referendum was tough for a lot of people as well. And it has the same points that Daniel said of joined up lives between England, Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland, and the other islands. But what we have to remember is that any cause for democratic legitimacy engages fully with what it means to be a person, to be a citizen, and to be able to be effective at the world stage. So I believe that taking those things, you can say that the EU institutions are not functional towards a position at the world stage. They're not functional towards economic success. They're not functional for realizing the democratic potential of your citizens. So you argue for those institutions that can. I believe Westminster largely delivers on those promises. It's not a perfect system, but it's a democratic system, and maybe that's why it's not seen as so perfect. And with strengthening devolution and, of course, supporting and respecting a future possible vote on independence, I believe that's a democratic and straightforward way. It's principled and it's stable.
Is there any other question? Yep.
This is for Daniel. You mentioned that, well, your point was that the European Union has problems, but leaving it is not the solution. But it seems that there don't seem to be any real pathways for enacting change. So what would you suggest are methods of fixing for the countries remaining in the EU?
Okay, well, I only speak about things that I'm qualified to speak about. And one thing that I'm involved with is writing, as I'm sure Dominic is as well. I don't know, Dominic, do you apply to the European Union for money?
No?
Okay, so he's a man of principle. But I do. And at a meeting that I had with scientists who, and Europe funds a lot of scientific research, and this is essential for the security of Europe in the future, and also for economic development. Because our competitors, such as China, can put in vastly more resources into research than, say, England can alone, right? Or United Kingdom. So it's very important that we maintain European research and development. And this was a meeting of physical scientists, and they were really worried that that there was not enough money coming from the European Union into science. So a number of Nobel Prize winning, I can't remember how many of them went, but a number of European Nobel Prize winning scientists called up the technocrats, or whatever they are, bureaucrats, technocrats, what do you prefer?
They're great people, they're just in the wrong institution.
Well, anyway, the great people in the wrong institution, they turned up there and you just imagine sitting in your office and in front of you are several Nobel Prize winning scientists. And they said, hey, hang on a minute, we need more money. Because if you don't give us money, we can't do research. And if you don't have research, you don't have economists, you don't have defense, you don't have anything. And that is how more money was given from the European Union into science. Now, I'm not going to talk about things I don't know about, but I know that that is a true story, and I know that there are many people in this university who spend most of their time trying to get money from the European Union. And I believe that that money is very well spent, and I believe that with cooperation between universities across Europe that the European Union allows, including Oxford, which gets a substantial amount of its funding from the European Union, I believe that that is one way that small-scale institutions, such as this institution, can benefit from the European Union. Because this university receives funds from the European Union for research. and if there was no European Union, or if the situation which I have now, which is when I call up my colleagues in the United Kingdom and say, hey, do you fancy doing a research project between England and Spain? They say, well, hang on, we don't know the rules anymore because we're not sure if we're even going to be connected anymore. Yeah? So, and just on another point in the scientific communion is a question of language. And you, as I, are very lucky that we can use English. And it's something which I trade upon, because it's something that I can use in Spain, which is very useful for this university and useful for my colleagues, because it is the lingua franca of science. But if with Britain not in the European Union, why bother having European Union documents in English, right? And if we're not going to use English, how is the European Union going to communicate? How are scientists going to communicate in this generation? Maybe in the future we'll be speaking Russian or Chinese or, I don't know, Scottish. I don't know which is more difficult to learn. Thank you.
I'm going to take advantage, and then Justin asks a question. I'm going to take advantage of the microphone. I never do that, but I'm going to make a question to Dominic. That you pointed out the question. You got my question to him. I had the same question to him, and I have a small question to Dominic, which is the 51% majority. It's true that, I mean, I don't have strong views on the Brexit, or I am sympathetic to arguments on the both sides. I think there are strong values on the both sides. Anyway, it's true that this is a very strong constitutional decision. And at 51%, is it a majority enough to take such a measure? So you can imagine also the Scotland independence. With a 51%, Scotland could have got the independence from Great Britain. And many people is accusing and is saying that David Cameron was really irresponsible deciding to call this referendum. So don't you think this 51% is not so democratic to take such a decision?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. It also reflects how divided Britain is on this topic, and that is not a good state of affairs. I like people divided by opinion, but when you are too divided politically, then of course it can cause personal problems as well, which can be seen even at a family level, and that's tough for everyone involved. But the point that I want to make is, so shall we go with the 49%? Is that more legitimate to take the views of 49%? Or is it that we have a European Union which is trying to give the impression that when you leave, you can't rejoin? Why isn't it that we can't say, wow, that was very close vote, so we just need to convince 2% more, we do another referendum, and then we can rejoin? But it seems, in fact, that the European Union is an organization with a clear ideal for which you have to have absolute commitment to the centralization of your affairs over the long term for you to be included as a part of it. Now, that's a strange situation. Most people who would argue for Scottish independence or for Scotland to remain in the UK would say, I will be very sad if Scotland leaves, and if they leave by a small margin, maybe in a future generation, I might be able to convince, and we might be able to come back together. But then even if we say, oh no, it's okay that the EU has this view, and of course if you leave, you should completely leave. And of course anyone who joins has to join the euro now anyway, so of course because you must take the euro, Britain can't rejoin on the terms in which it exited. Okay, so it's a complete divorce. Then you say, okay, but it's not just 51%, it's the majority of the UK Parliament, led by the executive, who voted for the referendum to take place. That wasn't 51%. That was much more. And then the vote happened, and all of the major politicians were on the side of Remain, and Nigel Farage and others, who are seen as very contentious at the margins of British politics, were the representatives of Leave. And they still managed to win, despite the pressure of all of those major political parties. And then we had it reviewed by the judiciary, which said the government can have the power if Parliament agrees to it. And so we had to go back to Parliament, and we did a vote. And overwhelmingly, again by far more than 51%, the MPs voted to leave. Now, they did it on the basis of their conscientious support of what a referendum is, and that they gave the terms of the referendum as simple majority. They honor their word, just as the Westminster Democratic Convention honors its procedure of voting in a majority. If other countries do different practices, we can adopt those practices, but we do so before the outcome, not after the outcome, if we don't like the outcome.
Yes.
So this question is for Professor Dominic. Well, thank you very much for your speech. Many interesting ideas. Previously, you talked about the rigidity of the Treaty of Lisbon and that the European Union is an organization based on treaties. And I would just like to ask you, how would you compare the treaties of the European Union, Treaty of Lisbon, to 1788, the Constitution of the United States of America? And in terms of its democratic deficit, in a sense, because, well, in 1788, it was mainly a decision of the state delegates. And while in the Treaty of Lisbon, there were ratification by each member states of the European Union, either through parliamentary decision or through referenda in the case of Ireland, for instance. And also in terms of maybe this rigidity of the European Commission, would you say that a European Commission that is less complex, that has less competence, that is perhaps a bit more simple, would it be a more desirable organization? Yeah, that's the question.
Thank you. Those are really good questions. I'll take them in order. So, if I say the EU is illegitimate, does that make the US Constitution illegitimate? I don't base the EU's illegitimacy on an idea that in its drafting it was illegal. I just say that if you do a vote and everyone wants, or the majority wants to not cooperate with it, then respecting the ideas of democracy, then you should allow that country to leave. I think for the EU it's a great idea to leave because there isn't anything that is going to help reform it internally.